Hey gamers, I'm Chambo, and every time I see Kingseeker Framped in Firelink Shrine, I just can't help thinking, what that mouth do?
I'm Brendan. I'm the bearer of the seek less.
And howdy, I'm Gingy, also known as the Chaos Bug stuck on Solaire's head.
And is that an ultra great sword, or are you just excited to see me? It's me, Patrick. Welcome to RPGaymer Season 4, Episode 10, an episode about the SoulsBorne series. Well, here we are back again with another episode, and I know in terms of my Discord and myself, this is one of the episodes that I was most looking forward to this season when I was planning the scope of everything. Like Brendan, I feel like I messaged you probably over a year ago at this point when I was planning this, being
Oh
like,
yeah,
"Yo, Souls, you on for a Souls episode?" And you were like, "Yo."
yeah.
But before we actually get into the episode, I want to go around and welcome back and welcome new people. So first of all, Chambo, since you are our most recent returner, thank you again for making another appearance. Love having you here.
Hell yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for asking me back.
And how are Kaizo's going?
Super good. We've been playing some really tough ones. There's some new developments in what people are designing with, which is really cool. So, loving the Kaizo world right now.
What? Tell me one thing. What's new right now?
So, people are playing around in I guess, a realm called Mode 7,
Okay.
which on the Super Nintendo, Mode 7 was kind of this. I don't really explain it or understand it in technical terms, but it was basically kind of like allowed the rotation of sprites and kind of backgrounds and stuff like that, and how you actually traverse through. So there's some really cool new levels coming out using Mode 7, where you're just platforming with Mario in a completely different way.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's building a ton of creativity. It's really cool.
Again, that's one of my favorite things to do is when I just feel like I need to decompress is pop on some shorts for some Kaizos. It's just like a really good way to just fix your attention on something else. They're so entertaining
Oh
to
yeah.
watch. Yeah. And Brendan, welcome back. It's been a little while, and I'm happy that we finally get to be
Yeah.
on an episode together. What have you been up to, my friend?
The same for what I'm usually up to, writing about video games and then playing dungeon crawlers in my free time.
Of course, of course. Speaking of crawlers, how is the crawl doing? What is your most recent project right now?
Well, ever since I guess since the last time I've been on, I went full time over at GameSpot and associate editor over there. So
Oh,
I haven't had as
awesome.
much time on the crawl as I normally would like. I actually have a couple videos that probably by the time this is out will hopefully be out or just about. One of them at least will be out, maybe the other one. And the most recent one I did was just like an overview of, looking at the dungeon crawlers in my physical collection,
Okay.
which was a fun little thing. And then before that, it was like a big roundup of all the dungeon crawlers, not all of them, but most of the notable ones that came out in 2023, because there was so many. And I thought 2024 was going to be a bit slower, but it is maybe just as busy or more. So probably in 2025, I'll have another big roundup for this year too.
What's the biggest hit for 2024? Like, if you had to pick the one.
Wow. Well, I think that's a really good question. I guess the one game, I mean, the game that I currently is my game of the year is Dragon's Dogma 2, but
Okay.
that's, it's dungeon crawler adjacent. And I think
Yeah.
the most recent, like, one that really, I think that a lot of people are really excited about, there's two. It would be Dread Delusion and then Scald against the Black Priory, which I played last night.
Just
It's
bought that.
so good.
Yeah.
It's
very
great.
excited. Good.
It's great.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Well, welcome back. I'm so glad to have you. And
Yeah,
then
thanks for having me.
our anticipated and special guest of the day, we have Gingy here. Gingy, want to say first of all, thank you for taking a chance on the random email that I sent. I feel like you are one of the only I think maybe you and Chambo are the two people who actually respond to emails, because no one else does, but you took a chance and actually responded. So thank you so much for that. I'm so glad to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. No, I remember it was some random email in the middle of the day, and I'm like, yeah, no, this sounds great. I'm totally in.
It's impossible to like the things that I have to go to find people to be on the podcast beyond the actual email is crazy. Like the Discord stalking or the Twitter/X messages. So like thank you for making it easy for me. But like I want to take some time here while we're here to just kind of like talk to you about you and what got you started, because I feel like you are a very thorough and respectable content creator. What kind of got you into wanting to make such deep videos about video games?
So, I mean, I've always been fascinated with video games. I mean, I got introduced to it when I was like 6, but after, YouTube started blowing up in like 2012, everyone was making videos. I'm like, that's cool stuff. I like being able to see the kind of different videos people were making. It took me years to finally start doing my own video though. I was so embarrassed by it, but I
I mean,
think
we all start somewhere, right?
yeah, I think after a while I realized that I kind of like being my own boss, not being able to, I don't like I can make whatever, do whenever, pivot to something else if I don't want to. I've never been one to, I don't like guidelines too much. So being my own boss and stuff is always kind of nice.
And what made you specifically want to get into like the retrospectives and the deep dives instead of to a shorter form content? Because I've heard from so many different creators like their approach and why they do the length and detailed content they do. What is it that sticks out about like this specific kind of content for you?
So it was, I used to make videos on a game called For Honor. It was Ubisoft's big
Hmm.
fighting game that they still
Yeah.
update. I love that game to death, but it wasn't really growing the channel, and I realized that my entire channel was based on one game, whereas I in real life played multiple games, and I was like, this doesn't really fit with my style. So I dropped it after years, which was such a insane decision for me to do in hindsight. But I just kind of just did whatever I wanted to, and I guess I fell into the retrospective area. It's kind of a buzzword that a lot of people use, to be fair, and I felt that it kind of fit for the videos I made. But I tried to do an emphasis on story reviews because I noticed not a lot of people did that. If I ever cover Far Cry, I will absolutely talk about it in this video, but it was Far Cry 6 that kind of gave me the like one of the pushes I needed to do it of all games. I remember I got a code for the game because I was buddy buddy with Ubisoft because of For Honor or whatnot. They were nice enough to give me a code for the game, but I got it like later than typical news outlets would get, but before the general public. Because I remember watching Skill Up's review of the game while I was playing it. I was like, well, what the hell do I do? I'm like, schmuck number 50 talking about this game. No one's going to care about my opinion. I have like 60K subs. What am I going to do? And I was like, well, no one's talking about the story because they don't want to spoil it, probably because there's some embargo detail in there too. And I was like, well, by the time I finish the game, it'll be past the embargo. I could just talk about the story. And I was like, let me review the story of Far Cry 6. That was like the first domino that fell into place. With a bunch of other ones too, but I realized that I like talking about stories a hell of a lot more. And that's kind of how it started.
I think that is an awesome way, and probably advice that you would give to any new content creator would be to like find what you like, but also find your niche, right? Like definitely want to hone in specifically on your approach that makes you unique. Because you're right, if you're fighting against other content creators, not literally, but like you have to find what sets you apart. And that could be personality, that could be like the what you specifically go into, that could be challenge runs for someone for like Chambo, for example. So I think that's just like a really cool way to look at how you found yourself in content creation. So that's cool, man.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of, I think some of these longer, more detailed, and more complex games, I think this is a really good way to transition into our topic for the day. So we are here finally talking about Soulsborne, which is such a mouthful at this point because I feel like it doesn't even encompass the totality of all of the games that fit into just like the what we're specifically talking about but I guess I want to know from each of you, because we're all going to have varying points. When did the Souls series first enter your life? What was your first game? When did you pick it up in terms of like when it released? And we can just kind of like go around and talk about these things.
I want to say maybe 2013, 2014. Xbox has this thing, games with gold. I played Xbox games for like my entire life, and games with gold was this thing.
No, I'm just joking.
Okay, all right. Xbox has this thing, games with gold, where I think 2 times out of the month you would get a game for free. I think they stopped doing it recently, probably because it wasn't very lucrative and didn't get them much money. And one day in like the middle of a month, you could get Dark Souls 1. And the greatest thing is that if you installed it during that like 2-week period, you kept it forever. So I still have the original Dark Souls 1, no DLC installed. And I played it. I heard of Dark Souls before, heard of the difficulty. I got through Asylum Demon, no issue. Instead of going right to Undead Burg, I went left to the catacombs, died because it was pitch black and a giant skeleton killed me. I quit playing after that. I never touched it for years.
Oh wow! So you are one of the hard stoppers then.
That completely filtered me. I was not really very tolerant. I didn't like hard difficulty. I also played a lot of like multiplayer games because I was like, I could just go play COD after this, so I'm just gonna go do that. And then 2 years later, 2016 came around. Dark Souls 3 came out, and I'm thinking something in the back of my head was like, it's coming back. You should play it again. I'm like, I didn't even get to the first one. How the hell am I gonna get to the third? And then I played it, and I stuck with it. Ever since I beat Dark Souls 3, I've been in love with this series. Ever since then, it's such a gorgeous game.
Yeah, really glad that you came back to it. Brendan, how about you, buddy? Where did you first start?
Well, so I've been playing FromSoft games since the PS2 with Armored Core 2.
Ooh,
and,
no, just joking.
and I was a casual Armored Core fan, and it was like, what was it, 2009, I think, when Demon Souls came out. And I'd heard all about it. My friend had a PlayStation 3 at the time, and I was really interested in the game because everyone was like, it's so weird and difficult, and half the people I had read like on the internet hated it, and the other half loved it. So I checked it out at his place, and I thought it was such a cool game, and I had no idea that it was FromSoft until we were booting it up, and it was the FromSoft logo, and I was like, oh, I know these guys. These guys make cool mech games. And so I was like ambiently interested in Demon Souls for a really long time. And then when Dark Souls came out, I was there day one, and I fell in love with the game immediately. It's one of 2 games that really reinvigorated my love for video games overall. It was Dark Souls, and then Skyrim came out like within a month of each other.
What a good year for gaming, truly.
It was solid, dude. Yeah, it was so good. And so ever since then, I've been a diehard fan of the series. I loved Dark Souls 2 when it came out, Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3, all of it. I have, varying opinions about which ones I like best. I think Dark Souls 1 and Demon Souls still top my list for a lot of, nostalgic reasons, and also some design reasons too. But
sure.
But I think, it's one of those top 4 series for me. So I feel like it's been around as long in my life as long as it's been around in the industry itself. So
sure. Chambo, how about you, bud?
Yeah, so I'm probably the one that's maybe latest to the Dark Souls party. I grew up obviously with a lot of Nintendo games, playing a lot of platformers, and much like Gingy said, COD and Halo and those multiplayer shooters. So RPG gamers or RPG games or like the Dark Souls series was not on my radar. So I first got involved with Dark Souls 1, the remastered version, in 2020. And that was shortly after I had started streaming. And I think where the parallel came from with that is I sort of dove into doing this Super Mario World Kaizo thing, which is very challenging platform and Mario levels. And I mean, I say challenging when we're talking about the Dark Souls games. That's kind of a misnomer, but a lot of my chat was saying, "Oh, you might like the Dark Souls series," and so
I would so much rather do a Souls than a Kaizo. Like I think you're coming. Yeah. You're taking it like a step down on difficulty. You're coming into the easier from what you did.
Yeah. I don't know. You can grind through Dark Souls. You can't grind through Kaizo.
You will get ground.
Sometimes it feels like you have to. But, yeah. Yeah. So Then I kind of found out that a lot of the community that I'm involved in is very, closely related to the Dark Souls community as well, and that sort of sense of overcoming these ridiculous challenges in games that you really enjoy. And so I played Dark Souls 1 remastered on the Switch when it first kind of came out, and I was like, this is awesome. I had no clue what the fuck I was doing in terms of where I need to go and what I need to solve. As we know, it's very obscure for, the person who's just joining into the game, but I loved it. I love the challenge. I love the combat. I love just the sense that you can kind of take your character wherever you want to in this game and however you want to build that up. And yeah, I've loved the series ever since.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's any shame in coming in at any point, and like I would hate to hear someone shaming someone, because I love it when people share the joy in games that I like, and to me it doesn't matter like if you started at the beginning or you came in much later. Personally, for the Souls series, I was a Demon Souls baby. Like, I got it, I think it was maybe 2010. My co-host Jason, it was our last year in college, actually had it, and he didn't like it, so I picked it up and I started playing it. And there was just something about, I don't feel like there are many hard games that are enjoyable, especially in that time frame. I didn't,
Mm-hmm.
and there weren't really any games like it. Like, it was an RPG, but it kind of wasn't an RPG, and it almost had a little bit of a survival horroriness to it. Like, it had a lot of
Absolutely.
different things that really just dragged me in. And I feel like, even though I like labeled as RPGaymer, like, I'm a pretty versatile gamer. I play a lot of different styles and genres of games. So when you find something that blends, especially at the time, I mean, it definitely, Demon Souls is not a perfect game, but like at the time, blend a lot of those elements so seamlessly, like it was an instant hook.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, like thinking back to that, you reminded me of like that is the reason I got into dungeon crawlers, was because of Demon Souls and Dark Souls. I was looking for more games like that,
Mm-hmm.
and then I was exposed to stuff like the Dark Spire, and through that Etrian Odyssey, and that was just like,
Etrian,
yeah.
yes.
So that was like the gateway to me, right? Is this whole obsession with like difficult in terms of like high degree of challenge, but maybe not like dexterity so much. Dungeon crawlers versus, I mean, what Dark Souls has become is very much like more of a player skill driven thing. But back in the day, it was kind of a mix of both, and I find that just such an interesting like design ethos, and it's just such a special series. It's so cool.
Truly. One thing that you said there too, what Dark Souls has become, and that's kind of what I want to talk about next with like what you think. Oh, and I'll also preface this, toxic fan base aside, what do you think that SoulsBorne means to the world? Because I feel like it's very important to emphasize that, because I personally think this is one of the most toxic fan bases in general, but I don't want to talk about those people. I want to talk about like the joyful parts of this. So what are we thinking? What does this series mean to the world?
I think, well, from an outside perspective looking in, I think a lot of people think of it as like the weird hard games that like only the hardcorest of gamers will ever beat. I've watched so many people who are like not amazing at games in general steamroll these games at some point. And it's like there is no, you don't need to be some hardcore gamer with 20 plus years of experience or whatever to play these games. That's so I've never understood the hard part. I get that they're difficult, but never that like they're too hard not to play. But I can see, I mean, that's how I felt back in 2014. I'm like, yeah, this really isn't my thing. These are too difficult for me. But I think, yeah, from outside looking in, I think they are. But when you're in the community and you're talking with people about the game, there's such a unique experience. Because every day I hop on Twitter, somebody's got some insane theory about this new thing coming out, or this new character, or just some thing they've made. It's such the community aspect of the game is probably the best part. I think that's what it means a lot to me, at least.
The non-toxic ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like the playground aspect of it, right? Like even if you're not interfacing with the community, like if you have friends who are playing it along with you, and it's like playing Elden Ring is the most recent example, being like, oh, I found this really cool weapon just in this corner of the world, and your friends are like, I didn't even know that existed.
Yeah.
Like that's a lot of fun, and it's cool that like in the age of the internet, you can have that like like the playground experience when you're in your 20s or 30s or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
or however old you are. You know, it's really that right there, I think, is one of the most important things that the Soul series brought back. But I would also, like, from me as someone who likes, you know, weird, crunchy dungeon crawlery games, seeing people just lose their minds over Elden Ring and falling in love with that type of gameplay and going, hey, you know what? This is hard, but it's not like this toxic gatekeepery hard. It's like, oh, I just have to figure this out and think about this in a different way. And watching them have that same experience that I've had with so many of these different types of games in different gameplay styles, it's really cool. And I like seeing people like the things that I like. So that's been really exciting.
Yeah, no, a friend of mine has recently just started playing these games for the first time, and having played almost all of them, actually, yeah, having played all of them, I kind you know, you get how things go. When Elden Ring came out, like it was different, but like, all right, these guys are going to be difficult. Let me go level up. Let me go find some stuff. There's probably some secrets somewhere. There's a poison swamp around the next corner, probably. A friend of mine never played these games. I couldn't believe my mind. Because the first thing he told me was that he picked the naked class, level 1. I was like, I haven't even done that. What the hell is wrong with you?
Every time I play, I pick it. Every time.
I couldn't believe it. First time I played was the night class. I've never played any of the Souls games with that class. I'm like, what? Go ahead.
Let me preface this, and if anyone's listened to my episodes, you know this. I'm terrible at picking classes and builds because I want to be able to do everything. So I always pick that class in hopes of, like, when I'm going to pick up things and it's going to help me identify what I want my build to be. And it actually works in reverse because then I become a terrible generalist.
Oh,
but I can't decide on any of those classes. So like I get it. Like I get the appeal of picking. I don't even think it's like it's that more challenging. I just think it's kind of like, how do you know? You know, like
yeah.
So
because he's been playing Elden Ring and he's been going throughout the map and he's like, yeah, I just made it to Caelid. I'm like, he's like, this place sucks. I'm like, yeah, this place is terrible place.
Yeah,
it's unique because he's telling me about these things. He's like, yeah, I went all throughout Stormvale Castle. I think I've gotten everything before Godric. He has not gotten everything because he missed the. I know he didn't see it because he hasn't mentioned it because he would have told me that giant weird demonic face at the bottom of Stormvale Castle that people think is Godwin or whatever. Hasn't seen it yet, and I'm like, you have like half of this whole thing left to go, and I kind of miss that. It's such a great feeling. That's why it's like a new Souls game doesn't come out that often. And I think Elden Ring for me at least was like the first one where I was involved in the community a bit more. Man, playing that for the first time was crazy.
I'd say even though it's not necessarily a series for everybody, and I think it can be. Like I think anyone could potentially play these. So you could find one that could be like the best start for someone. I don't feel like we see as many series come out that at the core maintain their identity. And like I've talked about this with Final Fantasy, how Final Fantasy is just like so different from beginning to end, that people kind of question where the identity is. But I feel like even though we see SoulsBorne making so many shifts from game to game, whether that's adding new elements or like a different playstyle in Sekiro or a thematic difference in Bloodborne, you still like have this true core identity, and I feel like there's a big comfort in that, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of people play these games. It's like if you can trust when you've played one, you get it, you're already locked in, you don't have to worry about like, oh, but I don't play that entry because blank. So I think that's kind of one of the things that I see as one of the reasons this means so much to the world.
Yeah.
I think you see that too with some other developers coming out with Souls like games that are different than FromSoft. Is if you've played a Dark Souls or the Elden Ring, you can kind of hop into these new titles. You know, things that have just come out pretty recently. Things like Lies of P or this new Anotria game that's coming out. Like kind of what you were saying is like you can trust that experience is going to be similar. You don't have to relearn a completely different kind of mechanic. Sure, there's going to be differences and subtleties here that make that game unique, but you kind of get the gist of like how this is going to play out, how this is going to go, how I'm going to level my character, what classes there's going to be, different weapons, different things like that. And that's comforting knowing that I'm going to jump into this thing that's probably going to be challenging and maybe I'm not going to know where I'm going to be, but at least I kind of have that foundation of like, hey, I've been through this before. I love this aspect of it, and I just can't wait to see where this goes.
I'm happy you brought that
Yeah.
up too, with like talking about Souls likes, which is like a completely separate conversation in terms of getting like heavy into. But I want to touch on that a little bit, just because you did bring it up on like the impact that this series has had on the industry and where you're seeing that kind of pop up. Because we are seeing so many elements in new games being referenced as like this is a Souls-like element. You know what I mean? It used to be like this is an RPG element, but now specifically
Mhm.
we're labeling things as Souls-like. So like, where are we seeing these impacts on the industry?
I mean, they're all over. I think to me, every few years there's a new, both in like single player and multiplayer realms, there's a new game that really comes out and revolutionizes, or that people just get really excited about. And then everyone else goes, hey, this is something that I've never considered, like mechanically or thematically or whatever, and I'm going to try this in my game or something like that. And with Souls likes, I think for a lot of people it was, unforgiving difficulty, like high skill type of thing, but also this kind of fail forward difficulty where you're not going to hit a game over screen. You're going to just get respawned back, and you can go try this again. And yeah, you may lose your currency, your souls, or whatever it happens to be in whatever game, but getting back to that point isn't impossible. And so like that kind of no, it's like to me it was like the equivalent of Mario and platformers being like, we're done with the live system. And now it's like in action RPGs, we're like, we're not going to do a game over screen. We're just going to respawn you over here. And that like that sort of thing, like that's a very specific thing, a very specific example, I should say. But that to me was really the thing that Demon Souls and Dark Souls did. That was like the most positive for the industry, was this idea that we can do difficulty and challenge, but it doesn't have to be annoying. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's not
obviously there are
like
things about
you
these games,
full
but
hard stop game over in games anymore, right? Like you
right.
that's kind of been erased, and I feel like not that Souls is the catalyst, but I feel like it has influenced so many games to push more into what you're saying, where like you lose progress, but it's not so punitive that you can't get it back. Like I think that's what you're saying, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like it reminds me of, it's not new. The original Dragon Quest, when you died, you were sent back to the castle with half of your gold.
Mhm.
That's essentially the same thing, but from since then, if you had a party wipe in Final Fantasy VII, you had a game over screen, you reloaded your last save. That could have been 30 minutes, an hour of progress. Whereas in Dark Souls, the progress loss, it is different and it feels different. At least to
Mhm.
me, it does.
Yeah, oh absolutely.
I mean, the Souls like comment really. I mean, it's kind of rare that a game can spawn a genre. I mean, you have Metroidvania, but then like Souls like is just such an all encompassing term now. I mean, for all these different games that have come out, there's quite a few good ones. I mean, I
Mhm.
haven't played Lords of the Fallen, but Neo was really good from what I remember. Liza P was fantastic. That was more Sekiro based, but same
Mhm.
thing. And I mean, just check anything literally on Iron Pineapple's channel in the past 2 years. There's hundreds of Souls likes out there from the indie scene.
There are so many
It's
games there too that you wouldn't even like, if you at first glance you would consider a Souls like if you know the game Tunic, you'd think, oh,
Mhm.
that looks more like a Legends of Zelda game, but truly it is more Souls like than Legends of Zelda.
mm. Yeah, no, I
Certainly,
think
yeah.
some possibly are a bit of a stretch. I don't like to label everything, I see as a Souls
Hmm.
like, but I mean, yeah, I think having like an entire name based on the game you made is I think that's an amazing impact to have. I rarely does a game have something like that.
Yeah, these games have spawned a genre, and that's pretty impactful to the world of gaming. That you're even seeing not just for lack of a better word, clones or very similar games that are coming out like Dark Souls, but you see it now in sort of 2D, almost Metroidvania style games that have a Souls like element. So you're seeing that influence in completely other types of genres of games as well, and that's pretty big. Like that means people are here for it and people are liking it, and I think it's great. I agree. Not everything is probably a Souls-like, but you can see some of the elements that come through, and so I think that speaks to it a lot.
Truly. And I get what you guys are saying, especially you, Gingy, where like sometimes labeling thing can be to a detriment, because that might push people away from something when it might just be the most minute element in there. For example, we're talking about progress. I guess I want to know why you guys think labeling something a Souls-like is something that would cause fear in people. And do you think truly casual gamers could still get the most out of a Souls experience?
Yeah, I mean, well, knowing that, if you know anything about the Souls games, that they're difficult. Anyone, from the outside looking in, you hear Souls-like, it's like, oh, great, another difficult game. And look, they are pretty difficult. Liza P was pretty stressful at times, but mainly that's because I was never really good at Sekiro. That game was a pain in the ass at
Is anyone
points.
good at Sekiro? Truly?
I don't know.
I mean, there's some speedrunners that
no,
are good at it.
Some of the speedruns are
Some people
impressive. I spent
I'll tell my rage quit story later on that one, but
spent a good 3 hours on Ishin. I took a shower in the middle of it. I was like, I gotta cool off. I'm getting cooked, because that's my usual go-to. If I'm in a fight for a couple hours straight and I'm getting worse, I take a break. I'll shower if I need to. Be like, all right, because it works. I showered. I beat him in 20 minutes. I don't know why it works.
Every time.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah, but I think
the keys to success.
Yeah.
I think saying having a big sign that's Souls-like is kind of like a warning sign to some people, to be like, oh, this is the difficult game. I don't really want to play those. And I get it. Not everyone wants to play a difficult game. I understand. I almost quit these two. But I've started to come around to, no, I wouldn't say difficult games, but different games, because I like expanding my taste a little bit.
I like that.
Yeah. Here's a crazy one. We're talking about turn-based. We could maybe argue whether or not this is considered turn-based or not, but a game, I've beaten every Souls game, some of them multiple times. I cannot beat Final Fantasy 13. I have tried 4 separate occasions to beat this game.
You shouldn't. I'll just leave it. This is also a Final Fantasy 13 hate channel. Sorry, Brendan. I think you're a fan, aren't you?
I'm a moderate fan. I see the both sides. It's
okay,
fine.
so
it's
don't
not high on my list. You're fine.
I've never been really good at turn-based stuff. It's because that's whenever the ATB system got thrown into Final Fantasy, I will always put it on wait. I need it on. I can't do active because I need to think. I need to think a couple steps ahead. I can't do what's in the moment, what's happening 2 steps later. The paradigm system threw me off when I had to start thinking classes. But every time I keep coming back to this game. One of these days I'll beat it. But I keep coming back to it because it's I want to try something new because this is different. I want to give it a shot. I feel like I can, stepping out of my comfort zone a little bit. And I think that's, and I understand not everyone wants to do that, but I do think that's why the Souls-like name kind of throws a lot of people off, because they're difficult. You're going to struggle with these games. It's going to be very difficult. You're probably not going to have a good time for a lot of it, and it just doesn't sound fun. Video games are supposed to be fun. This doesn't sound fun. It sounds really painful, and I get it.
Chambo, what do you think, especially coming in a little bit later in terms of the series? Obviously you'd heard of it before you picked it up in 2020, right?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of asked 2 questions there, sort of like the Souls title. What does that mean? And then also for casual gamers, so I'll try to also speak to that.
Yeah.
But I definitely think, I mean, you hear anything that's a Souls-like or has a Dark Souls element, the first thing that pops in my head is, okay, it's going to be difficult. It's probably going to have some roadblocks that are going to be challenging. I'm going to have to really persist through to get that. But then in the back of my head, I'm also like, that means there's probably a really big sense of reward and accomplishment in that game as well, which I love. That's coming from the Kaizo side, that's something that you only get from these kind of games, is that sense of achievement. Truly. When you get past one of those roadblocks. So it definitely has that for lack of a better word, scariness around the difficulty side. When we talk about can casual gamers really play this, or can really benefit from playing these games or have a good time, I think one thing the Souls games do really well, especially when we're talking about RPGs, so to speak, is that you can approach it in kind of whatever way you want. you can spend your time grinding certain things and leveling up so that you're, more powerful and you have an easier time getting through it, or a, more approachable time getting through a boss or a section. Or you can, learn the attacks and, learn how to dodge better and things like that. And you can go based off of skill. And that's kind of where I fall in. When I think of RPGs and I think of like some of the turn-based stuff or some of the Final Fantasy games, I'm not a Final Fantasy gamer.
I recall.
Sorry, outing myself there. But it's I've never wanted to do the grinding just for the sake of grinding to be leveled up enough to be able to get through something. I kind of want to be able to, can I do this on my own skill? Can I learn? Can I adapt? And I think that's what the Souls games do really well, is that you can take kind of whatever path. So it could be for the hardcore gamers that are going to speedrun it at level 0 naked guy, which I've also never done because that's crazy. But or you can kind of go about it your own way and learn different strategies. So I think it definitely has a place for casual gamers.
I always wonder about this topic too, because I think a lot of people get stuck on the game being unfair. And I think that is one way that you could look at it. But I also think on the flip side, like maybe I was not observant, maybe I was not prepared, or maybe I didn't like strategically place myself in a good way that I spawned 5 more guys that all jumped me. Like I think that I don't want to say like it's excuses, but I think that what you're saying, maybe a little bit, Chambo, is like people who come from maybe a turn-based standpoint don't think of a game like this because it is more in the numbers versus in the skill. And we actually just did an episode on turn-based battles earlier this season where we kind of talked about like it's just a different type of thinking, and I think like it's a different code switch that people haven't adjusted to yet. Like I found the transition rough when I started playing Dark Souls, and I liked hard games and I played a lot of survival horror games before that, but I still wasn't ready for the type of thinking because it's coming at you in so many different ways. But I also don't necessarily think for the most part it's unfair. Well, with that aside, I think one thing I want to talk about, because we're talking about 14 years of gaming at this point, and I think I'm just thinking of it, not to exclude Armored Core, like the earlier Armored Core, Brendan, but like...
Well, I mean, here's the thing too, is even before Armored Core, there was Kingsfield.
Right.
And like, if you go back and you play that stuff, a lot of that, because you were speaking to it earlier about how like that core of the identity is I mean, you play Armored Core and Kingsfield or Shadow Tower, and then you go play Demon Souls, you go, oh wow, there's a lot of these games.
You see it.
Souls, like
you
a
see
lot.
It.
Yeah.
Demon Souls is definitely the first one that stuck, and I feel like it's probably the most, or the earliest representation that people would recognize. So from like this,
that is the SoulsBorne formula.
Truly when the souls were born. There we go. I did it. I won the internet. How do you think this series has evolved from Demon Souls to Elden Ring? And then Brendan, if you want to talk about some of the earlier stuff in there from Kingsfield too, like give us the little history lesson in some of those things as well. But I'm curious from you guys, like how have we seen this series evolve over the course of what we know of it?
So the game has definitely gotten faster. Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1 by comparison, super slow, to the point where I'm dodging too early because I think they're going to throw it too fast now.
Mm-hmm.
Elden Ring,
there's no wind-ups.
Yeah, Elden Ring has delays, there's wind-ups, they have like 12-hit combos. I mean, every game is difficult for some reason, but if you were to go from least difficult to most difficult, it's literally from Demon Souls to Elden Ring to me, because it just gets harder as the games go on to me. But I feel like once you understand the game, you kind of understand the rest of them. But yeah, no, I feel like it has gotten to a point where bosses have started getting just a little bit harder. I think Malenia is hopefully the hardest we will ever get. I'm praying the DLC is not harder. I'm going to be wrong. I know something's going to be more difficult, and I'm praying. But she's without question the hardest boss any Souls game. She's so goddamn tough.
We'll get there. I will hardcore disagree with you when we get there. But we'll
now I'm fascinated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I want to know.
But I think well, they've gotten more difficult, but I also think I guess because all the games they've really started all the games have changed a lot. I was gonna say that they've gotten more linear, but that's not even true. Because Dark Souls 1 was very, I don't want to say Metroidvania, I don't think it's the right term, but it was very interconnected. You could see other locations.
I think that's fair. Yeah,
you
I think
could
that's
see
a fair way to say
locations
it.
from one. I think you could see Blighttown from Firelink Shrine if you squint hard enough. But then they started getting a bit linear, but now they've expanded to open world. That's kind of the thing I've liked about From Software. They don't see like they like changing stuff, but I also like that they don't see failures as failures, more of like good ideas that maybe we could change up a bit more. Like Storm King in Demon Souls was then made into Yorm for Dark Souls 3, which then moved to Rykard in Elden Ring. It's the same exact format. One unique weapon that kills a boss, and it's like, they could have just stopped it at Storm King and just called it a night, but they're like, no, we have something here. Let's see if we can, spin this around a little bit. I think Rykard is probably the best version of it.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
I think they've nailed it finally. But that's the one thing that's evolved a bit more, which is weird because you would think like, because of how different these games are, it's a new experience, and it is to a degree. But I think that once you've gotten one game down, you get the structure of the rest of it, to me anyway. Like Elden Ring was unique, but it was like, okay, like I kind of understand what they're going to do here. They're going to throw some crazy ass boss at me in the beginning. There's going to be some hidden pathways, probably an invisible door somewhere in this wall. It's but yeah, the games have evolved in very interesting direction to me.
I mean, yeah, I mean, this is the thing about this series that I find the most interesting, and probably the stuff that I probably have the most thoughts on. So I'll do my best to keep it short and sweet. But the thing about what Gingy was saying, I agree. Especially with regards to the boss battles, where they become so much faster and so much more player skill dependent. Whereas, the earlier games were slower, and they weren't so much dependent on your skill and dexterity necessarily. They were dependent on your understanding of the game and its mechanics, especially like if you look at Demon Souls, which was coming right off of Kingsfield and Shadow Tower, which have a lot of like adventure game and old school CRPG elements in it, where it was like you were solving puzzles and, doing like skill checks to get through encounters, not just fighting. So there's a little bit of that with like a lot of the, like Demon Souls has like 5 or 6 gimmick bosses that basically you don't need to be quote unquote good. You just have to know that, oh, I just need to equip this thing, hide behind this pillar, and we're good. I beat this boss because I just have to hit it twice once it does its little puzzle game mechanics. Elden Ring has, with the exception of Rykard and some other small elements, has basically abandoned that stuff. And I think that's kind of a shame. I really like those elements. But what Elden Ring has done instead has made these games imminently breakable. You can have these overpowered, crazy builds that they just melt everything in 2 to 3 seconds, right? So it's kind of weird. It's like there's this, like, if you look at a graph, it'd be like, okay, the bosses have gotten faster, they're more difficult, but also the game allows you to do more things. So like there's this, like, the balance is just absolutely fascinating. And so like when I hear people say like, Elden Ring is the most approachable, if I play it, and I suspect maybe Gingy plays it a similar way, where it's like, okay, these bosses are wrecking me because of the way that I built my character and the way I'm playing the game, versus you go and play Demon Souls and you just steamroll it. And I know people who like cannot get through Dark Souls 1 and they hate it, but they loved Elden Ring. And I think it's because of that evolution. And I find that to be the most fascinating way that these games have evolved over time. And there's this, just the design that's underpinning all of it is the idea is we're going to give you a challenge and we want you to overcome it in whatever way like works for you and the build or your play style. And so like the games have not changed that much in that regard. It's just the ways they let you break it or the ways they let you progress is what's changed. So I think that's the biggest difference. I mean, obviously we get into the nitty gritty about like build viability, level design, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But at its core, it actually hasn't changed really all that much.
That's kind of how I feel too, is that I how do I say it? Like I don't necessarily see a huge evolution in terms of from this game to this game to this game, what's different, what's fundamentally changed. Apart from more like game mechanics, quality of life things, and obviously maybe more advancements just in game design over the years, right? And I also agree with what Gingy says. I think some of the games have gotten faster. The bosses may have gotten harder, but I think you're not as limited in later titles than you were maybe in earlier ones, being like locked into animations and things like that, or being able to do a couple different options to avoid an attack as opposed to just the one that you had before. So it's kind of evolved in terms of like more difficulty, but also like more freedom for the players. So I think it's kind of in line with each other. But overall design, I think, has been at least very similar. Obviously, the one big difference, glaring difference that I can see is in Elden Ring, where it was way more open world than a linear experience. Whether you like that or not is, up for you. But and I like that they tried that. I think that was a nice new addition to the Souls formula of like, oh, well, now I can kind of go everywhere. I can span every inch of the map, and sure, there's some checkpoints here and there, but you can also sidestep around them. You don't have to go to that boss. You can go around it. You can just do this other thing. And so, I don't really know where I'm going with that.
No, you're fine.
I think it's interesting to see, because it goes back to my point earlier about like when I hop into a Souls game, I expect something and it always delivers that. And it hasn't really like changed too much, at least in my opinion, from when I play them.
I wonder like how much of its evolution is kind of revolved around gaming trends too. Like I think by the time we got to Bloodborne, we started to see a lot more of an uptick in mythos-based games, so like a lot more Cthulhu-oriented games and whatnot. And then when we get to Elden Ring, I think, at some point you're going to have to get into this truly open world experience, but fortunately it still matches what like the Souls series is. Like, they didn't really have to pivot that hard. Obviously the odd man out, I think, of all the games is Sekiro, just because it is more the most narrative driven of the games, whether you know what's going or not, or why your people are dying from dragon rot. Like that, I think that is probably the one unique experience. But
I mean, honestly, I don't even consider it part of the Soul series. It mechanically and design wise is very similar, but it's not an RPG. That is a Tenchu Metroidvania through and through. You can't really grind your way through that game.
No.
That is the game that you really have to quote unquote get good at. And so like I think that's the game. Like I think when people who haven't touched these games think, oh, Dark Souls is like it, they think it's like Sekiro, and it's not. Like that's the hardcore one. If you don't want to have like this intense melee combat skill-based thing, just avoid Sekiro. Bloodborne inches into that, but it's still manageable. There's still a lot of RPG in there. Everything else, like if you like grinding in Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy, I guarantee you can make it through these games.
Truly.
Yeah. Maybe not Sekiro, though.
Yeah,
well, let's talk about some of those features, too, since we're already kind of getting into that part of the conversation. What are some of the things that, core game features that you tend to like, or maybe some of the ones that you don't like that tend to pop up a lot in the series? Like, for example, I said narratives in Sekiro. One thing that really frustrates me when I'm playing any of the Souls games is when I miss characters, like NPCs, and you get locked out of a story arc, and there's nothing like too punitive about that in a couple of them. Some of them it is, but I just hate that because there's no like giant indicator that there is a character here that you should be talking to. I mean, hell, one of the people in Bloodborne I thought was a full-on enemy, so I attacked and killed her, so like I feel like that is something that I don't always enjoy about the series. That tends to be in a lot of them. But what about you guys? What are some of the core things that pop up for you that are likes or dislikes?
So to bring up what you just mentioned before, I only agree with that in Elden Ring, actually. I think because for the most part, because the games they're not linear, even Dark Souls 1 isn't, you kind of know where you should go first. Like, kind of go to Undeadburg, maybe go to the catacombs. I say that because Pinwheel is super easy to most people, but I think that's because they go there last. I'm pretty sure he's supposed to be fought in pretty early on. But like most of the NPCs have like a general idea, like they go with you. It does get very confusing though. I think where Elden Ring was problematic was because it's so open, and you could just straight up skip bosses. Like, you could walk around Stormvale Castle and never touch Godric ever. So you'll miss so much of it, and because there's no reason to go backwards, back to Stormvale. It's like, all right, well, why would I need to go back here? And then, well, there's there's an NPC. I think that's why they added NPC markers on the map now, because they didn't have that on release.
Did they? Okay,
yeah,
because when I played on
that.
release, and I didn't have anything like that.
Yeah. I think they added it a few weeks or so after launch or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, it's probably the one game we might need that, because you can. There's arguably, like, that's the issue with having too much freedom for the game, because anybody could go anywhere, and you could skip so much. You're not going to find these people. Like, I did not
100% agree. Yeah.
I didn't find Millicent until way, way later. I had no idea she existed, because I missed like one little section in Caelid, and then I just never found her. That was a bit annoying. In terms of stuff I do like, though, I mean, you could put like half a Demon Souls in there. There's a lot of good mechanics in there. World Tendency, I still don't know how it works, but it's so cool.
Oh, I hate it.
Cool.
I hate it.
I love it. I think it's so unique to me. I think very unique. Dark Souls 2 had this, the Moongrass stuff, finite healing. I think that's cool, but I think it also depends on how the game works, because Dark Souls 2, especially Scholar, the first Sin edition, has so many enemies in that game. So they're like, all right, we're going to give you a ton of healing so you could push through it. Demon Souls was all about going through an entire section because there was no bonfires. So you needed more healing. If you had, 5 Estus flasks, you wouldn't be able to get through some of those levels. So having 20, 30 different healing items, I mean, it's kind of overpowered, but like, you need it. And I do miss that a little bit. That's why I kind of like Dark Souls 2, where it gave you a little bit of both. Also, there's so many good things about each of these games, but so I'll kind of rifle through it. Trick weapons in Bloodborne, absolutely awesome. That shit is cool. So good to me. And
I'm still stuck on World Tendency. You really think that World Tendency was a good idea? Okay, sorry. I think it's a good idea. I don't think it was implemented well. Like, if you die as a human, you go negative tendency, right?
So hold on. Here's the thing. I think that the idea of it being implemented positively, or it was implemented well, because it did exactly what it's supposed to do. You're supposed to confuse the hell out of you, and you're supposed to figure out, like, what does this do? That is well implemented. If that doesn't click with you, that's an entirely different thing. We can have that discussion. But World Tendency as an idea, and it's actually something that Gingy said earlier too, was like weird games trying different stuff. Like, one of the reasons I love From Software and kind of ignore other Souls-likes in 90% of the time is because they go weird. They're not just like, oh, we're just doing the same thing. They are like, hey, here's a bunch of weird stuff. We're not going to tell you how it works. And I like that. I like BS mechanics in games a lot. Even if they're frustrating, I can't help but respect it. And so World Tendency is like the apex of that to me. I will bring it up whenever I can. Absolutely, World Tendency defender.
I love it. It's similar to a random mechanic that's just like, we're gonna throw this in. Best thing Dark Souls 2 ever made: bonfire aesthetics. Love it. Respawning
the powering up your
putting it on New Game Plus. I also like how they changed the bosses too. They drop different souls on New Game Plus. That's such a cool lore mechanic.
Oh, do they really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
The 4 main bosses drop different souls on New Game Plus, and it's a lore. It's different because it actually tells you whose soul they came from. I think the Iron King had like Gwyn's soul or somebody's soul, like the past 4 lords from the first game. There's a connection there. I think that's incredible.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, but I didn't know that.
The only thing I could probably do without is see, Dark Souls 2 and Demon Souls had this, and it was the how much health, like your total health gets removed every time you die. The only reason I don't like it is because there's always a ring in those games that offsets the cost of it. And I feel like that's such a crutch thing you always have to put on. I don't mind you losing health, though. I think that's it's kind of annoying, especially because I think Dark Souls 2, you can get super low at some point, like 20% or whatever. It's a cool mechanic, but I also think it kind of heavily relies on using that one ring that offsets the cost of it. And the last thing I'll say, because I'm kind of rambling with this, Elden Ring should have added covenants. That's all I'm saying. They should have added covenants. That's the
game that needed them.
They had a perfect faction set up for a covenant, and they didn't add it. I'm so annoyed by it.
I guess I'm with you on that, where I think if any game had it, that would be the one, because I'm not the biggest fan, but like in that truly open world experience like that, you see it fitting a lot more. I'm on the fence about Covenant just because I really hate being invaded when I'm already having a shit time getting through an area. And I know like
Yeah.
I can pop a game into offline mode, but sometimes it is nice having those clues from other players, which I think is a big positive. Like I think that is one of the best positives of the series is like whether they are true or false, like having little notes about things that other players notice, and sometimes they're annoyingly comical. But when you are like literally just trying to like rush the boss, and all of a sudden you're being invaded, and you're like, "Fuck!" Like I got a red spirit in front of me, and like three guys chasing me from behind. This is so annoying. I just want to get my
Yeah.
souls back. And that's a wrap on part 1 of this week's episode. We'll be back next week with part 2 so you can hear the rest of our gaming related shenanigans. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening, YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode of RPGaymer.